everyone. How has the day been? Woo! Thank you for sticking with us. I've got a little housekeeping to do. I have to thank our sponsors again who helped us put together this conference. Without them, you wouldn't be here with us and we wouldn't be exchanging all these fabulous ideas. So I have to read through the list. If you are from any of these organizations, please give a clap or a hoot. AARP, Adaptive Adventures, Blue Systems, Bike Mark, Circuit, CMAP, Colorado Car Share, Comunato, Chicago Transit Authority, Drop Mobility, Drover AI, Enterprise, Illinois Department of Transportation, Colony, Lime, Lyft, May Mobility, Morgant Wilson Foundation, Optibus, Parking Reform Network, Spare, Spin, Stantec, Transit App, Translock, Uber, Velocia, Via, Wave, Windlesmarks, WSP, and Zipcar. Thank you very, very much. We're going to close strong, and I've got two fabulous speakers to send us all off with fabulous ideas. And I have the pleasure of, we started with the Deputy Administrator of the Federal Transportation Authority. One of our endings is with the Assistant Secretary for Transportation Policy. Before he joined the US DOT, he was Vice President for Land Use and Development at Smart Growth America and at T4 America. He was a senior fellow at the Brookings Institute and also was a professor at George Washington University. Help me welcome Chris Coes.
Good afternoon, everyone. Oh no. Good afternoon, everyone. I was like, I know I'm going to see my conference. Again, Christopher Coes, currently the Assistant Secretary for Transportation Policy at the Department of Transportation. You may say, that's a lot of words. What does that mean? Well, over the last 2 years, I spent helping develop and now are implementing the historic bipartisan infrastructure law. And also, as you know, $650 billion of that program comes to the Department of Transportation, of which over about $100 billion of discretionary grants comes through our office. So what I'm going to do today is provide you some reality, but more importantly, a call to action to each of you based on what we're seeing day in and day out at the Department of Transportation as it relates to how are we going to truly achieve our shared mobility in this country. So first and foremost, let's talk about the reality. As someone who grew up in rural Southwest Georgia, sitting at home on the internet, as many of us were probably doing in the late 80s, early 90s, my mom goes out on Labor Day. It's a rainy day in this rural town, doing like any other parent would do, and go and get food to barbecue. How many people like barbecue? Yeah, exactly. I do too. And I had to say, Southwest Georgia has the best barbecue. Sorry, everybody. But one of the things that I think many and too often we're seeing, and we've continued to see even in the late 80s, early 90s, even to today, like my mother who was waiting at a red light on a rainy day on Labor Day, she was hit by a drunk driver on a state highway Main Street that was designed not for everyone, but it was actually designed for someone to go through 3 red lights at higher speeds, even though you're going through a rural Main Street downtown. Even today, 2 years into the pandemic, we've seen now over 43,000 individuals die on our roadways. When we talk about shared mobility, we have to come back and remind ourselves that this is a fundamental question about how do we, as individuals, stay safe when we go from point A to point B, point C, and back home again. Shared mobility must recognize this quintessential understanding that we as humans must be safe at all times and be able to enjoy the very thing that the built environment is designed for us to see one another, engage in economic activity, and maybe in some cases enjoy a little barbecue. But if we have to look at the reality that in the last 2 years, we've seen increases in traffic fatalities. We've seen in the built environment that people who are walking, biking, are disproportionately seeing these deaths. We know that long before many of us came into this room today, over the last 60 years, we've been designing the built environment where half of those who are not able to walk, like my mother, without a cane or a walker or assistance, that the system is not designed for them. But of course, we know that individual experience, those stories in our families and our friends about how the built environment, but we also know how the way we design our infrastructure, how we design the built environment has an impact, not just on our individual selves, but on our society, on our climate, on our economic performance. So I'm sure you've heard, and you all know, that transportation is disproportionately the largest contributor to greenhouse gases. But we also know that many of the challenges that we're seeing in the economy are the lack of supply chain resiliency, the lack of housing affordability, the fact that individuals in COVID who lived in communities that did not have good walkability, that did not have access, transit access to healthcare, were on the front lines of seeing the disproportionate deaths during the pandemic. Turns out shared mobility is not just the ability for us to move from one mode to the next through a common technological ability. It's fundamentally the way we are to save not only our own personal lives, but also our economy and our planet. So at the Department of Transportation, on day one, we recognized that in order for us to meet the crisis that we were seeing on the roadways and in lives, in roadway deaths, and how do we make sure our economy can not only recover, but be more resilient for the future, to ensure that we're meeting the climate crisis, we recognize these issues are not in silos. These are all interconnected. And that if you talk about safety, you have to talk about equity. If you talk about equity and safety, you're talking about climate. If you're talking about equity, safety, and climate, you're actually talking about how we're going to transform our economy and be a leader in the future. And that is why our department, for the first time, made sure that climate and equity were a part of our strategic planning process, which means these are the values that when we look at our rules, our regulations, our discretionary grants, we are encouraging people, our teams, your teams, private sector, public sector, to incorporate and come with us. Because now we are in a crisis, but this crisis is being met by our opportunity. As many of you are familiar, by a show of hands, how many of you read our National Roadway Strategy? For the first time, this administration has committed itself, like many of the local governments, as well as private sector, to commit to a vision zero deaths on our roadway. But in addition to 0 deaths on our roadway, we're committed to the fact that we're not going to leave anyone behind, which is why the president launched the Justice 40 initiative, which ensures that communities who have had the lack of access, who have endured the overwhelming lack of environmental justice in their communities, will be at the front of the line. And the key thing here is not to make sure that a dollar is going into the community, it's actually the benefits that go into those communities are what we're counting. But of course, we're not stopping there. We recognize that if we're going to not only create a more safe, more economical, vibrant, but more importantly, carbon-free, we have to have a whole of government and a whole of society approach, which is why we launched a national blueprint with HUD, EPA, USDA to begin the hard work of decarbonizing our transportation sector. Now, of course, with that being said, it should be no surprise, as someone who worked in the real estate industry for a long time in the transportation space, I fundamentally believe that you can't have a conversation about safer roads, shared mobility, greenhouse gas reduction if you don't have a conversation with land use. And this is how the Department of Transportation is approaching the work of implementing the bipartisan infrastructure law. Now, with that, this is a moment where I go, take a deep breath. It's not all that bad. Because of the great work of so many of you, friends, old friends, and some of the new friends I've met today, because of the advocacy, because of the research, because of your lived experience, we were actually able, as a country, be able to pass an historic bipartisan infrastructure law. Now, oftentimes you probably hear people say, there's a lot of money wishing around. No, the key thing about this bipartisan infrastructure law, as well as the Inflation Reduction Act, it is aligned with the values that I laid out before. For the first time, we have now seen over a significant increase. So about over 59% of those formula dollars that you used to talk about that normally didn't go to your local community to help you with your bike ped project, your complete street project, over 59% of those dollars that normally go to your state DOTs are coming straight to the ground, to local governments to promote more shared mobility. We also have the fact that now we have critical programs designed to retrofit those rural main streets that were designed for high level of service for cars to go through that hit my mom in the early 90s. Now we can do and provide resources to those local governments in partnership with their community organizations to do road diets and dedicated to safer streets. But of course, the bipartisan infrastructure law also sets in motion a new shared mobility future where now, for the first time, MPOs will have to coordinate their transportation plans with their housing plans. Eureka! Of course, you've heard from my colleagues from FTA, we have the largest investment in public transportation, but also right now, state DOTs are developing carbon reduction plans that have to center shared mobility to help reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We are having a moment where we're aligning the values and policies that many of you have been championing, many of you have been looking for, into a large framework that's driving systematic change. Now, I like to say that in addition to the values and, of course, the policy changes and the values that we're bringing to this conversation, the proof is in the pudding. So many of you are aware we have a new program called the Safe Streets and Roads for All program. It is the first of its kind designed to give local governments, counties specifically, and regions direct resources to achieve their Vision Zero and Safe Streets agenda and projects. Just recently, we announced over 500 awards. Now, why, you may say, that sounds nice. How many of you, right now, I have a live experience where I get to be with what we call the godmother of the Complete Streets movement, Barbara McCann. I used to work with her at Smart Grid America. She's now at FHWA, carrying the flame. I had a talk with her just a couple of days ago at the elevator. When we were at Smart Grid America in about 2014, we only had 100 communities, local governments, who actually have passed a complete street policy. In 1 year, the federal government was able to give over 526 communities over $1 million to $25 million to retrofit their communities to implement those plans. And we are on track to do that now for the next 4.5 years. That is what the work that we're trying to do at the Department of Transportation. In Detroit, we saw where we just gave them, for example, $24 million, where they are literally, Detroit, this particular project represented over 24% of all fatalities in Wayne County. And those fatalities were over 15% of the national average. This is the type of change we're trying to incentivize through this grant program. When you look at our RAISE program, we actually are not doing just, this is not a story about urban places, but we're also finding that rural communities are asking, how do we create more of a shared mobility lifestyle? And in Yazoo, Mississippi, yes, in Mississippi, they're recognizing, like, no, our future is not just tied to our Main Street revitalization, is not just tied to what we see here. We want to be tied to the larger regional economy. They have an Amtrak service that brings 2 trains a day. They're reestablishing that service, they're rebuilding their train station, and they're using a shared mobility framework of creating new complete streets, new bike lanes to connect the new retail to the outer neighborhoods. If this can happen in Detroit, this can happen in Yazoo, Mississippi, this can happen anywhere. In our Reconnected Communities program, one of our premier equity programs designed to recognize that there are communities who were intentionally or unintentionally divided through infrastructure facility. And for the first time, we are now able to go to those communities who had high pollution, who had lack of access to healthcare, or in this case, in the story of Long Beach, where we gave $30 million. Anyone here from California? Anyone from Long Beach? So I had an opportunity just last week to go and tour this project, and it brought tears to my eyes. Because when you go to Long Beach on the 710, the 2 projects are here is to take out 2 major highway ramps that are 50 miles an hour, On both the north and south end of the ramps, on each end is an elementary and a middle school. One of the highest pedestrian fatalities of children in the state was at this intersection. Now we're removing those ramps, and we're moving and creating a road diet where now the kids from those high school and that middle school can have equal access to the park that has been totally disconnected for a long time. That is the transformation that a shared mobility can deliver. But what is really fascinating in the moment of time we're in right now, with the level not only the traditional complete streets, the bike path, the connection, but the introduction of technology, we were really excited to support the North Carolina DOT, who basically said, look, there are a lot of our rural communities. One of the things we learned during COVID is that people and whether it's our employers, they would say it's really one of the major barriers for our employees is having reliable transportation. I remember there was a pastor in Missouri who used to say, sometimes when I work in these communities, people have these cars called hope and prayer cars. I hope it gets me to my job, and I pray it gets me back. And increasingly, we're finding that the reliance on the automobile to actually get to a doctor's appointment or get to that job that helps you pay for your child's future. Well, North Carolina DOT partnering with I won't call out the ride service program, but they partnered together to identify how to deliver on-demand transit services to 11 counties to remove the need that you need to own a car to be able to go to your work, go to your job, or go to church, or whatever you want to do. That is shared mobility in the 21st century. And they're piloting this in these 11 communities and hope to bring this at scale. Now, of course, as I said before, transportation and land use is very important for us to achieve our objectives. One of the things I need you to be aware of is that as a Department of Transportation, we are getting in the land use game. And we recognize that right now, transit agencies need more riders. Transit agencies need more revenue sources. And right now, we need more affordable housing. Due to the bipartisan infrastructure law, we now have over $100 billion that we can now provide patient capital to transit agencies, to real estate developers, to build housing at transit stations and within a walkable shed, as well as incentivize and build out shared mobility to connect those corridors. Now is the time for us to actually get these deals done to make this happen. So, of course, I hear all the time, you have a great vision, you guys have good values, you're producing great projects, you're showing us the way, but hold up. I'm just from a community, there's too many programs, there's too many NOFOs, I don't understand, I can't pay $200,000 for a grant writer. Well, guess what? For the first time, we've now introduced a new Thriving Communities Initiative, which will introduce a federal, local, and community partnership where we are providing you capacity builders to get you from project vision to project delivery. And we're really excited that we've got over 64 communities, including Main Street cohort, also 29 communities dedicated to creating complete neighborhoods around the shared mobility principles as well as transit-oriented development. As you can see, some of the communities here you are living in. If you have not touched base with your local government, please touch base with them because we are going to be incentivizing and providing that capacity in the next month. With that being said, in closing, we are in a unique, once-in-a-generation moment to truly transform the built environment in a way that no matter who you are, where you live, you can live in a clean, safe, economically vibrant place. But I, in this country and this department, need your help. First and foremost, if you have not signed up to the Department of Transportation's call to action to commit with us in partnership to achieve our Vision Zero goals, please go to our website, www.transportation.gov, and sign up today. Because Department of Transportation, we can't do it alone. We have to do this in partnership with our local governments and the private sector. Second, right now, if you are not talking to your local government, to your regional planning organization, your NPOs and state DOTs, they are right now designing their new plans for carbon reduction and their safety plans, which include shared mobility. If you're not in the room advocating for these issues, we're not going to get them to the extent that we want them. Please get engaged. And last but not least, one of the things that you should just be know, as long as this administration is intact, we're going to make sure that these resources truly are aligned with our values. With that, my friends, I say keep going, keep fighting. Thank you for the great work. Thank you for the great projects. We're here to partner, and I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with all of you. Have a great afternoon.